They accused me of trespassing on my own land. That was the official line until the morning I cranked open that century-old damn wheel and turned their $1 million luxury cabin project into the most expensive mud pit in state history. I can still feel the cold steel of that wheel under my palms, hear the slow groan of the gates as they creaked open, and watch Timber Lake empty like someone pulling the plug on a giant bathtub. One minute it was a mirror of rippling silver under the dawn light. Next, it was a stinking, sucking pit of black muck, swallowing construction equipment whole. Bulldozers, excavators, and generators, their engines coughing and dying one by one, sank into the sludge as the sound of failing diesel echoed across the gutted basin. The air carried a smell you don't forget, the sharp, sour tang of exposed lake bed, where decades of silt and secrets had been sealed away. Until now. In my hand, I held my grandfather's dented steel thermos, steam curling up from the same strong coffee he used to drink here every morning for 30 years. I stood exactly where he once stood, long before Timber Lake became a playground for outsiders with more money than history. Back then, this water was crystal clear, the shoreline dotted with modest cabins built by honest hands. Not an HOA president's personal gold rush scheme. Somewhere across the drained lake, the foreman's voice cut through the morning air, panicked and raw, barking into a radio about environmental disaster and federal investigation. His words bounced off the empty basin walls, brittle and desperate. I just took another sip of coffee and smiled. But you don't get to a moment like that overnight. So let me take you back to where this all began. What would you do if your HOA tried to steal the land your family had held for 100 years? Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I'm willing to bet you've got HOA horror stories of your own. My name is Ezra Blackwood, and this fight started with 47 acres of Wisconsin lakefront my grandfather bought in 1924 for $300 and a handshake. Timber Lake was nothing back then, just a lumber company's log pond. But Grandpa saw something nobody else did, a sanctuary. A place where a man could drink his morning coffee without some clipboard-wielding busybody telling him his dock violated community standards. I'm 52 now, a third-generation civil engineer, and for 3 years straight, I started every morning sitting on that same weathered drio where Grandpa taught me to tie bowline knots and listen for loon calls. The scent of pine sap mixed with the smoke from the stone fireplace he built with his own hands. Those dock boards still groan with the same familiar creak under my boots. A sound that means home. That peace lasted until she arrived. The acrid sting of cigarette smoke drifted through my porch screen before I even saw them. Two shadows pacing along my shoreline like they'd just inherited the place. Heavy boots thudded over the gravel, their flashlights cutting across my walls in jittery arcs. When I finally stepped outside, still in my bathrobe, the cold air biting at my bare ankles, one of them actually had the malbim to tell me I was creating a disturbance by switching on my own porch light at 4 in the damn morning. "Gentlemen," I said evenly, my voice low but sharp enough to carry, "unless you're here with a badge and a warrant, you're trespassing." The taller one smirked. "We have authorization from the HOA. I couldn't help the laugh that escaped my throat, short, humorless. "Right, because HOAs have police powers now. Good to know." By Thursday, Constance had upped the game. She'd somehow sweet-talked the county into gating off the old access road, my family's road, used since Eisenhower was in office. Now, a gleaming aluminum barrier with a keypad lock and a bold black sign read, "Authorized residents only." Guess whose name didn't make that list? It meant I now had to drive an extra 3 miles around the lake just to reach my own driveway. Community enhancement, she called it. I called it exactly what it was, a strategic chokehold. The Whisper campaign began almost instantly. At Kowalski's Hardware, where I'd been buying everything from dock screws to fishing tackle for 2 decades, old Pete wouldn't meet my eyes. "Sorry, Ezra," he muttered, staring at the counter. "Can't extend credit anymore. Orders from above." At the diner, conversations went flat the second I walked in. Karen, the good Karen, not the HOA variety, leaned in close as she refilled my coffee, her voice barely a whisper. Constance is telling people you're having some kind of breakdown since the divorce, she said. Says you might do something dangerous with all that engineering knowledge of yours. My divorce, 2 years behind me and none of their business. But in Constance's world, personal tragedies weren't sacred. They were ammunition. Then came the notes. Anonymous, tucked under my windshield wipers. Sell and leave. Don't make this ugly. Some battles can't be won. Thing is, when you push an engineer past his breaking point, something changes. We start looking for structural weaknesses, not just in bridges or dams, but in the people and systems trying to destroy us. Saturday morning found me in the local historical society, surrounded by the musty perfume of old paper and secrets long since forgotten. Mrs. Henderson, the volunteer librarian, a woman who'd probably seen every scheme this town had hatched since Vietnam, kept sliding dusty boxes across the table toward me. "Terrible what they're doing to you, dear," she whispered, glancing at the doorway like the walls might be wired. "These old lumber company records might interest you. Sometimes the old solutions work best." She wasn't kidding. Timber Lake hadn't always been a lake. It was born in 1923 when Northwood's Lumber Company built a dam to float logs downstream. The company folded during the Depression, but here's the twist. The dam's ownership was never properly transferred. The title just disappeared into bureaucratic limbo. I sat there staring at black and white photographs of men in suspenders working a massive wooden wheel, the dam roaring beneath them. Then came the blueprints, carefully inked, every gear and sluice gate detailed with the kind of precision only an engineer could love, in neat handwriting along the margin. Manual operation maintained for emergency flood control. Translation? That dam was still private property, abandoned, forgotten, sitting there like a loaded weapon nobody remembered they owned. Dad used to say, the best solutions are hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone smart enough to notice. He'd been talking about engineering problems, but in that moment, I realized it applied to revenge too. By Monday morning, I was in the state revenue office chasing a paper trail through 3 departments and 4 cups of coffee bitter enough to peel paint. A tired clerk finally pulled a file from a cabinet that looked like it hadn't been opened since Clinton was in office. "Oh my," she said, scanning the record. "Northwood's Dam. Sir, this property has 847 donos and unpaid taxes going back 15 years. Wisconsin law allows purchase for the amount owed. Would you be interested?" $847. I'd spent more than that on a single dinner in Chicago. But the real treasure wasn't the price, it was the numbers in those engineering specs. Legally, the dam could drop Timber Lake by 8 feet without violating flood control regulations. 8 feet would be enough to expose every single foundation Constance's crews had poured. Enough to turn their construction zone into a wasteland of sucking mud. And maybe, just maybe, it would uncover 70 years' worth of things they didn't want found beneath the water. When I got home that evening, another note was waiting under my wiper. "Final warning, take the offer and disappear." I looked across the lake at the North Shore where construction lights burned bright against the dusk. Crews working like the devil was on their heels. Then I looked down at the deed in my hand, my fresh signature still drying on the purchase agreement. It was time to show Constance what happens when you corner someone who knows exactly how water works. Her final move came with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer through stained glass. Wednesday morning, I was drinking coffee on my non-compliant dock when a black sedan crunched to a stop in my driveway. Out stepped a man in a $1,000 suit with a briefcase and a smile sharp enough to draw blood. "Mr. Blackwood," he began, "I'm attorney Winston Carlisle, representing the Timber Lake Homeowners Association. I have here a restraining order preventing you from interfering with legitimate community development." He slid the papers across my dock railing like he was dealing poker chips. According to them, I'd threatened critical infrastructure and posed a clear and present danger to community welfare. News to me, but there it was in legal black and white. The kicker? I was now prohibited from operating, tampering with, or even approaching any water control structures in the township. Someone had clearly done their homework. They knew about the dam. "This is temporary, of course," Carlisle said smoothly. "Just until we can resolve this misunderstanding." A misunderstanding worth $1 million restraining order. Sure, by Thursday afternoon, bulldozers were tearing century-old oaks out of the ground, on land that was indisputably mine, trees my grandfather had climbed as a boy. Their roots gave way with sickening cracks, the trunks toppling into the lake with enormous splashes that sent waves slapping against my boots. The water turned a murky brown as sediment churned up from the bottom. Diesel fumes hung heavy in the air, mixing with the raw scent of fresh-cut timber. By sunset, dead fish floated belly up near my dock. The smell was almost unbearable, a cocktail of rotting wildlife and spilled fuel. That night, I sat on the dock with a glass of bourbon, the hum of generators droning from across the water. And for the first time since my father's funeral, I felt something I hated, helpless. But grief has a way of hardening into resolve. Friday morning, Carlo was back, this time with a sheriff's deputy in tow. Emergency court hearing on Monday, he announced. The judge will decide whether to make the restraining order permanent. Judge Martinez is very concerned about public safety, especially when it involves aging infrastructure operated by emotionally compromised individuals. Emotionally compromised. That was the new narrative. I wasn't a landowner defending his rights anymore. I was the crazy divorcee with a dangerous dam. But while they were busy painting me as unhinged, I was learning something they didn't want me to know. Those 1923 blueprints weren't just designs. They were instructions for controlled environmental justice. Drop the lake 8 feet, and you'd ruin their construction site. Drop it 12, and you'd expose whatever industrial skeletons had been dumped in these waters for decades. I spent the weekend testing the dam's manual controls under pre-dawn cover, learning the resistance of each wheel, the pitch of the gears, the song of water rushing through the sluices. The stress was a constant metallic taste in my mouth, but under my hands, those cold brass wheels felt like hope. Sunday evening, my son Derek called from Minneapolis. Dad, I saw the news online. Are you okay? Mom says you're obsessing over this property thing. I'm fine, son. Just protecting what your great-grandfather built. But is it worth all this? Maybe you should just take their money and... I looked across the lake at Sunday night. While Constance Piton was probably polishing her court testimony and rehearsing her injured victim routine in front of a mirror, my phone rang. It was Delilah Santos from the County Herald, and her voice had that unmistakable voltage of a reporter who's just hit pay dirt. Ezra, she said, not even bothering with hello, you need to hear this. She'd been quietly digging into the P-Team's finances for weeks, chasing shell companies and offshore accounts like a bloodhound on a scent. And now she'd found the body. Holy cow, she said, catching herself. They're broke, Ezra. Flat out broke. The woman who strutted around in designer boots, waving million-dollar development plans like a scepter, was financially underwater. Turns out her previous luxury projects in Illinois had gone down in flames. Lawsuits, cost overruns, at least one site so contaminated it literally sank into the ground. Every disaster left scorched investors and unpaid contractors in its wake. She's borrowed against everything, Delilah continued. Their house, Braden's construction equipment, even her mother's retirement fund. This cabin project isn't just their golden goose. It's the last straw holding their whole life together. Without it, they're done, ruined. Then she hit me with the real grenade. She dug into the HOA's emergency powers clause, the one Constance used to steamroll the so-called property vote. I called every homeowner on the lake, Delilah said. Half of them never even got notified. State law requires 60 days written notice for any vote involving eminent domain or property transfer. That vote was illegal, Ezra. Every signature, every approval, worthless. But she wasn't finished. Remember that environmental complaint you filed, she asked? It triggered a mandatory records search, and the EPA found something interesting. I leaned forward on the dock, phone pressed to my ear, the construction lights burning across the water like a second sunrise. Your dam, she said, isn't just for lowering the water level. It's a key. And when you turn that key, decades of secrets come up for air. The original lumber company that owned Timber Lake didn't just cut trees. They dumped industrial waste, chemical sludge, construction debris right into the water. Later, developers followed the same dirty tradition. Lower the water, hide the evidence. Repeat. Ezra, Delilah said, the EPA suspects Timber Lake could be a Superfund site. If contamination's confirmed, the feds take over. No construction, no exceptions. Cleanup could take years, and the bill lands on everyone who ever touched the property, past and present. Suddenly, Constance's frantic pace made perfect sense. She wasn't just trying to build cabins. She was racing a ticking environmental time bomb. And if that bomb went off, her financial empire would be dust before she could say, change order. Then Delilah delivered the sweetest line of the night. The second the contamination is official, all construction bonds and insurance go void. Braden's company would be personally on the hook for millions in cleanup. I sat there in the dark, hearing the night machinery drone across the water. Constance wasn't stealing my land to expand her empire. She was using it as collateral in one last desperate gamble to outrun the truth. And the truth was about to catch her. Monday morning, 5 a.m. My kitchen table looked like a command center. 3 laptops open to government databases, coffee brewing like fuel for war. It was time to turn Delilah's intel into a plan. First call, Jasper Tooley, retired park ranger with 40 years of battle scars from protecting wilderness against greed like Constance's. Jasper, I need everything, I told him. Photos, records, dates, every dead fish, every illegal pour, every gallon of runoff. His gravelly voice held the satisfaction of a man who'd been waiting for this moment. Son, I've been photographing their mess since day one. I've got pictures of them dumping concrete into spawning beds, chemicals leaching into groundwater, sediment clouds killing 3 generations of bass fingerlings. He also had friends in the EPA's regional office, the kind who hated pushing paper more than they hated freezing winters. I'll have inspectors there by Wednesday, he promised. But you need to give them something they can't ignore. That's where the dam came in. Second call, Camden Cross, an environmental lawyer who lived for taking down corrupt developers. He'd shut down 3 illegal projects in 5 years, and Constance's scheme ticked every box in his playbook. Corruption, pollution, and federal law violations. Ezra, this is beautiful, he said, voice practically purring. We're not just fighting for your land. We're exposing an entire pattern of fraud. His strategy? File simultaneous lawsuits in federal and state court citing violations of the Clean Water Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, and Wisconsin's own statutes. Drown Constance's lawyers in so much paperwork they'd need a forklift to haul it into court. But Camden knew law alone wouldn't win. We needed media, public outrage, and political pressure to keep the case alive. Delilah already had 3 environmental groups and 2 investigative reporters lined up to hit the story hard. We had the law, we had the press, we had the science. Now we just needed the timing. Court was at 2 p.m. on Tuesday. Constance would be expecting to win a permanent injunction against my dam. But the moment the EPA saw contamination, federal law would override any local order. The plan was surgical. Drop the lake 8 feet to expose her illegal foundations, then 4 more to uncover the buried poison. All before the hearing. By the time her lawyers were done arguing, the lake would be federal jurisdiction, hers no longer to control. One thing, Ezra, Camden warned, desperate people do desperate things. If she sees the walls closing in, she might do something stupid. I thought about the security guards, the threats, the late-night visits. I'll be careful, I said, but tomorrow, this ends. Tuesday, 3 a.m. I woke to the metallic snap of bolt cutters at my gate. Through the window, flashlight beams bobbed in the dark, skimming across the dam. Then came the hiss and spit of a cutting torch. The smell of scorched metal drifted in on the breeze. Constance had just made her first move. She wasn't going to like my next one. Sparks drifted lazily through the pine-scented night air. Glowing embers carried on the breeze like fireflies. Across the dam, 3 figures in dark, hooded clothing were hunched over the manual controls, their flashlights darting nervously. They were trying to cripple the mechanism, likely hoping to sabotage it before I had the chance to use it. The sound of toss. What they didn't account for was Jasper's volunteer security detail. Retired military, men with night vision goggles, radios, and the kind of patience you only get from years in the service. They'd been taking shifts on my property ever since the threat started. "Hey!" Jasper's voice boomed across the water like a rifle shot. "You boys lost." The effect was instant. Scrambling footsteps, muttered curses, and the slam of car doors. Headlights cut across the trees as their vehicle fishtailed onto the county road. By the time I'd pulled on boots and grabbed a flashlight, they were long gone, leaving only a mess of cut fence wire and fresh scorch marks on the dam housing. But Constance Paton was just getting warmed up. Tuesday morning, the county building inspector arrived, a man whose signature had been on every HOA violation against my property for the past 3 years. He had new concerns about my electrical system and alleged fire hazards. His solution? An immediate inspection by county-approved contractors only. Cost? $12,000, payable up front. A curious thing about those approved contractors, they were all mysteriously booked solid for the next 6 months. "Safety first, Mr. Blackwood," he said without blinking. "We can't have dangerous conditions threatening the community." The community. The same community dumping construction chemicals into our drinking water. When that didn't shake me, Constance shifted tactics. By Wednesday afternoon, the local paper ran a front-page piece about my erratic behavior and dangerous obsession with controlling water levels, claiming downstream residents were at risk. Anonymous sources, almost certainly members of her book club, hinted I'd been mentally unstable since my divorce. According to them, I was talking to myself on my walks and aggressively confronting construction crews. The truth? Those conversations were phone calls with Camden, and the aggression was me telling workers to stop dumping concrete directly into fish spawning grounds. But truth never stands a chance against a good smear campaign. Then came the real masterpiece: bribery. Thanks to a suspicious court clerk and Delilah's hidden camera, we caught Constance red-handed. In a downtown restaurant over salmon and white wine, she explained to the clerk how a small administrative fee could ensure my case received proper consideration. She was offering $5,000 to delay my hearing until her construction was complete. When bribery didn't work, she went after my finances. Thursday morning, my loan officer called. Someone had raised concerns about my ability to meet my credit obligations due to significant legal expenses. The bank wasn't calling the loan yet, but they now required updated financials and a psychiatric evaluation to keep my checking account open. Yes, a psychiatric evaluation for a bank account. Meanwhile, Constance's crews were working like an army under siege. Floodlights turned the lake into a stadium, heavy machinery rattled the shoreline, and the loons fled for quieter waters. But desperation makes people sloppy. At 2 a.m. Wednesday night, Buck Morrison's trail cams caught Braden's crew unloading 50-gallon chemical drums into the lake. The footage showed hazmat labels, EPA violation stickers, and Braden himself directing the dump. Camden recognized the tactic instantly. They're not hiding old contamination. They're creating new contamination to blur the timeline of responsibility. Friday evening, 36 hours before my court hearing, Constance made her boldest move yet. The sheriff showed up with an emergency psychiatric hold order from a judge in another county. If they kept me locked up for evaluation until Monday, I'd miss my hearing and lose my damn rights forever. It almost worked, but Camden had anticipated something like this. He filed an emergency motion challenging the jurisdiction, bringing in Dr. Patricia Hawkins, a no-nonsense forensic psychiatrist. After 3 hours of tests, she concluded the hold was medically baseless and legally questionable. By Saturday afternoon, I was free. And then Camden found out the judge who'd signed the order was Braden's golf buddy, with deep ties to Constance's development consortium. We now had proof of conspiracy to abuse the judicial system, a federal crime. As I'd been fighting in court, Delilah's expose exploded across the state. Drone footage of toxic dumping, records of shell companies, bribed officials, it all went public. Timber Lake scandal was trending from Chicago to Minneapolis. Environmental groups demanded federal investigation. Still, Constance had one last gambit. Sunday morning, she tried to push an emergency county meeting to seize my dam through eminent domain. Minimal notice, no media, held in a courthouse basement. But Jasper's contacts got word out. By 9:45 a.m., The courthouse steps were packed with protesters, news crews, and, most importantly, Judge Martinez, who made it very clear that any water rights decision would be challenged in federal court. The commissioners folded in 15 minutes. That night, I sat on my dock, watching their construction lights burn through the darkness. Crews poured foundations below the lake's natural water line, fatal for their case once the water dropped. At 5:30 a.m. Monday, I stood at the dam, my grandfather's worn brass keys warm in my palm. The federal environmental team was on their way. Constance was about to learn the difference between money and leverage. The brass wheels of the dam were icy under my palms, their weight and chill grounding me in the moment. My grandfather used to say, "Sometimes you've got to let the truth rise to the surface." That's exactly what I was doing now. The first turn of the wheel released a low groan from the metal gates. Then came the sound, a deep, rumbling roar as Timber Lake began to exhale 80 years of secrets. White water churned out from the spillway, the echo rolling across the valley. I'd calculated everything to the inch, 8 feet of water in 4 hours. Just enough to lay bare the construction foundations without endangering the downstream flow. Across the lake, the first construction crews arrived, unaware of the change. Diesel engines coughed in the pre-dawn darkness, their sound bouncing off the water. Then came the foreman's voice over the radio, sharp, urgent. "Water's dropping fast. Shut down the trucks." By 7 o'clock a.m., Constance Peaton's million-dollar development was transforming into something out of a disaster documentary. The lakebed emerged like a scar, strewn with rusted machinery, collapsed barrels with faded hazard symbols, concrete rubble, and a slick rainbow sheen of petroleum. The stench hit next, acrid chemicals mixed with the sour reek of rotting organics. It burned the throat and watered the eyes. This wasn't just contamination. This was a decades-old environmental crime scene. At 8 a.m. sharp, just as Jasper had promised, 3 black SUVs rolled up alongside a mobile lab that looked like something out of a sci-fi film. The federal EPA had arrived. Dr. Sarah Bennett, their lead environmental scientist, stepped out, surveyed the toxic shoreline, and muttered, "Jesus Christ." She was already snapping photos of the barrels when she announced, without hesitation, that the area was now under federal investigation. Delilah's news crew was everywhere. Drones swooping over the exposed lakebed, cameras capturing EPA agents pulling samples, monitors displaying real-time contamination spikes as the buried waste touched air and water. And then, like a storm cloud rolling in, Constance arrived. Her white Escalade skidded to a stop in a spray of gravel. She stepped out in designer jeans and a face carved with panic. Whatever armor of control she'd worn for years was gone. "You can't do this," she screamed at me, jabbing a manicured finger in my direction while the cameras closed in. "This damn operation is illegal. I have a restraining order." "Actually, ma'am," Dr. Bennett cut in, her voice as calm as a scalpel, "Mr. Blackwood is operating under Federal Environmental Protection Authority. Your local restraining order is superseded by federal jurisdiction." The blood drained from Constance's face. She knew what that meant. Federal charges, federal penalties, and the kind of prison time no HOA president could spin away. "This contamination didn't come from us," she protested desperately. "It was already here. We're the victims." That's when Buck Morrison stepped forward, holding up his trail cam footage like a winning lottery ticket. Braden's crew, 3 nights ago, unloading fresh chemical drums straight into the lake. Hazmat labels and all. Dr. Bennett reviewed it on the spot. "Our forensics will separate historical contamination from fresh dumping. And what I'm seeing here, my own," she looked up at Constance, "is both." By now, the courthouse steps were packed. Environmental activists, homeowners, 3 news crews broadcasting live. Judge Martinez herself strode in, scanned the scene, and announced, "This afternoon's court hearing is canceled. Federal law takes precedence over any local order." It should have been the end, but Constance wasn't done humiliating herself. "You're all being manipulated," she shrieked. "This man is a domestic terrorist. He's destroying our economy out of spite and mental illness." The crowd went still. Cameras turned. This was the showdown they'd come for. I walked forward, holding 2 things: the original 1924 dam deed, and the fresh EPA contamination report. "Constance," I said, voice steady enough to carry over the water, "I didn't create this mess. I just lowered the water to show what you've been hiding for decades. This dam has been protecting the lake for a century. Your project would have built luxury cabins on top of a toxic waste dump, poisoning families before they even unpacked their suitcases." The crowd erupted, reporters surged, camera flashes lit the morning like fireworks, and Constance Peaton, HOA president, serial intimidator, and now federal defendant, was led away in handcuffs while her husband's machinery sat stranded in the sludge. 18 months later, I drink my morning coffee from my grandfather's dented thermos, sitting on the dock watching loons dive in the clearest water Timber Lake has seen since the 1920s. The $2.3 million Superfund cleanup removed 40 years of poison and turned the lake into a living classroom for environmental recovery. Constance is serving 3 years for conspiracy, bribery, and fraud. Braden lost his license, went bankrupt, and sold their mansion for pennies on the dollar. The HOA was dissolved and reborn with a conservation mandate, Buck Morrison as president, and a 10-year development moratorium to let nature heal. Property values jumped 20% once the EPA certified the water safe. The real victory? My son Derek bringing his kids to fish off the same dock my grandfather built. My granddaughter catching her first bass in 15 feet of water, so clear you could count the pebbles on the bottom. The dam is now a historic landmark, its brass wheels still turning smooth as silk. I still run my consulting firm, but now I help communities fight corrupt developments using the same environmental laws that saved Timber Lake. Turns out there are a lot of Constances out there, and they all make the same mistakes when they get desperate. If you take nothing else from my story, remember this: old property deeds can hide powerful rights. Tax auction properties can give you leverage for pennies. Environmental contamination hands you the biggest weapon: federal jurisdiction. And whistleblowers are not just protected, they're rewarded. Every summer we host Clean Water Days. Kids learn about ecology, families camp along the restored shoreline, and we tell the story of how one small dam stood against greed and won. Delilah and I, now married, still take on cases together. 6 illegal projects stopped. 4 corrupt officials prosecuted. Some mornings I stand at the dam before dawn, hands on the wheel, feeling the same cold metal my grandfather touched. And I remember conservation isn't about nostalgia. It's about giving the future something worth inheriting. So tell me, what's your HOA nightmare? Drop it in the comments. I read them all. And if you like seeing the little guy win, subscribe. Next week, I'll tell you about the farmer who found out his neighbor's $1 million mansion was built entirely on his land, and how he handled it will make you cheer. Until then, sometimes the best solutions are hiding in plain sight, just waiting for someone brave enough to turn the wheel.